Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Diversity Podcast with George Simons. The other day, we had a theater conference, right?
Yes.
And Hofstede's dimensions came up as a question to the whole audience. And the question was, is his research, or their research, and the material used in education still relevant for education in intercultural communication, right?
Right, yes. That's an important discussion going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to say before I start that I deeply respect the work of Hofstede,
Yeah.
who has been, in a sense, leading the field for many years
Mm-hmm.
by his initial research. And he was a very passionate man about the work that he did. I was fortunate enough to have dinner with him at a meeting about 2 years before he died, and enjoyed his company very much. So, first of all, I think all of us realize that in our work, whether it's intercultural or otherwise, in terms of research and knowledge, we all stand on the shoulders of people who've gone before us and do not deserve to be discarded or condemned in some way because of new developments, but simply recognized as helping us step along the way. So that's the most important thing I'd like to say by starting out,
Yeah.
because there are challenges that we need to look at the moment.
So for anyone listening, could you give an introduction on Hofstede's dimensions and his work from Geert Hofstede, and what the whole point is of the whole research?
Well, his original research was done many years ago, and basically in employees of one country around the world. And so what he attempted to determine was, are there certain attitudes of belief and behavior that characterize or dominate a certain cultural group? So, if he were interviewing the people in the USA, he would get one set of data. Perhaps in Italy, another set of data. Perhaps in Thailand, another set of data, and so on. All of his research is easily available, and there still is a website for his organization, which has carried on and expanded some of those things, and is also trying to deal with the current challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that he created his things on the data that he gathered and attempted to sort values and behaviors in terms of what are called dimensions. So a dimension would be something that is a range of belief and practice, for example, between how individualistic are you and your culture in your culture, and then how collective are you? In other words, what has to be done by yourself?
It's still making noise.
Yeah. What has to be done by yourself, and what has to be done in conjunction with others, or in collaboration with others, or in obedience to others, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he collected a set of dimensions. I'm not going to go through them all, simply to give a couple more illustrations. There's a dimension of how, let's say, how risk adverse you are.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a person who are you in your culture a place where risks are easily taken, or are they hard to take in the situation? Reluctancy existing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Just quickly, we can skim over them for anyone listening who don't know what Hofstede's dimensions are. So you said that it's a mapping of cultural behavior.
And belief.
And belief.
And the belief behind it, of course. You know,
Yeah.
Called values is the best way to talk about them, as values.
And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dimensions.
In that plan, there's
In that
various
plan,
versions.
there's various versions.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned individualism versus collectivism.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have, for instance, how a culture perceives power distance.
Right. How high is the boss? How
Yeah.
you know, is the boss a father-friendly figure, or is the boss a distant rule maker? Or
Exactly. So me and you, for instance, you're my boss.
yeah. Okay.
Well, we're sitting next to each other, so
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then you know how empowered do you feel to do stuff on your own, and how well do I communicate what I'm looking for you to do, and so on and so forth, and how do I do it? You know, is it do it or hell? You know, do it or you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Or here's what we want to do. Should we discuss how to go about? You know, the flexibility and the distance that one feels between the authority and one's life, and this, of course, applies to situations like families and all kinds of other groups. You know, not just work groups. Though you know his research came out of work groups, but it's a good starting point.
And then we have you mentioned uncertainty avoidance.
Yes.
And you mentioned uncertainty avoidance literally means to what degree does a culture avoid uncertainty?
Risks. Yeah,
risks.
What we were talking about. Yeah.
And we have long-term versus short-term orientation.
Yeah, expectations of how do I size up?
Yeah.
What takes time and what does not take time, and how quickly decisions are made, and so on.
And masculinity versus femininity.
Yeah, and that's been one of the most contentious ones, because it's really been, you know, certain. I think Sweden was labeled as one of the more feminine kinds of cultures, and they looked at traditional masculine and feminine dimensions that were in psychology and other kinds of stuff. And of course, this is highly contested, especially with the women's movement that has surged in the meantime and is saying, well, you know, let's, and are looking at things like the toxic masculinity and all that other sort of stuff. So big debate going on about gender and gender identities these days, as well as the various versions of sexual orientation. So that's been one of the most difficult ones throughout its history it's in the process.
Yeah. And then the last one, we have indulgence versus restraint. I don't really understand that one.
Fully. How much do you go out and celebrate, and how much do you...
Oh, that way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's all kinds of applications of it, but how much do you plunge in, and how much do you hold back, you know?
Like the festivals, for instance? Or
sure, okay, yeah.
Partying? Or
sure.
Celebrating?
Yeah, or any kind of activity, really. Yeah. It's that sort of thing. So, yes, those are the... That's a good, quick overview of some of the dimensions.
And these dimensions are the leading educational material in universities when you have classes on intercultural communication, correct?
Well, this is where the story starts to unravel, in the sense that for many, many years, this was taken as the best resource for understanding other cultures.
It was in my classes too.
Yeah. So what happens is, however, is that if it's simply taught rather indelicately, it easily turns into stereotypes. You're Dutch, so you've got to love cheese. You know?
Do you smoke weed?
Well,
they always ask me that.
I know you love cheese, and you're Dutch, but you know, it's all about you know, you're Dutch and you're very direct, or you know, there's going into all of those dimensions. I cannot assess a individual person in that way. Now, to look in the big picture, okay. Hofstede's work belongs to what we call essentialism in research, all right? Which is to say that the data produces the results and the results are therefore applied and used as the main way of understanding what's happening.
Okay.
Well, what's happened is that essentialism the research is passing on through a number of different stages. And today, it's especially with the arrival of neuroscientific research and new cognitive psychology, what we are realizing is that culture, for example, cannot be labeled in that way. The things that Hofstede brought up are still worth looking at because they are likely, or in some cases, to occur. Hofstede said that culture is the software of the mind, all right? And what neuroscience is telling us, for example, through the work of Mai Gwyn, is that context is the software of the mind. Culture is content, but how it gets applied, where, when, with whom, and how is the software that runs our activities, our beliefs, and our behaviors, though these sort of essentialist concepts may be stuck in our unconscious mind, you know. You see somebody wearing a sailor cap and your mind immediately brings up, what do you know about sailors, okay?
Yeah.
And it doesn't tell you anything about this person or his activities or whatever. So one of the things that we're learning to do is to rewire our minds in the sense of, okay, let's see what our minds have to say about this, but let's look and see and examine in this situation, in this context, is this the real thing? Is this the person I'm meeting?
Yeah.
And that's why storytelling has become such an important tool in intercultural work. I mean, the work that we do with our diversity games is essentially bringing people together to tell their stories about cultural things that go on in their existence in a whole wide range of ideas, and to give them the habit of, rather than insisting on stereotypes, to explore each other's stories to understand how that software is working in the context in which they live.
So what I find with Hofstede's dimensions is that it teaches you how to observe from a distance how a group behaves, a group of people.
Statistically.
Statistically, and it works really well if you want to analyze that from a far distance. But when you
it doesn't work really well. It offers you clues.
Clues, okay.
To examine.
But what I find is when you go there to that group, you don't meet the group, you meet one person at a time, and they are definitely not representative of that whole statistical dimension.
No.
And you really, the knowledge is useless when you meet a person, because every person is different.
Yes, but
I find that.
If you examine issues by people's relationship to them, their stories about them, you're liable to get a very good picture. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, groups do have purposes. Groups do have values. How people accept and express them is the story. You've got a football fan club, okay? Now your fan club goes there, and maybe you've got some rules about how you root and do this other sort of stuff, and hopefully your fan club has a value that says if you lose, you don't go wreck all the windows in town.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, see, and this is where we're struggling with the fact that groups do embrace values, general values that their members are expected to say. That we call these meta-narratives, big stories about how we should behave. And they do embrace those. And what we've learned from, I've mentioned him before, Jean-François Lyotard, the sociologist who invented the idea of meta-narrative, is, yes, every group has its big story about who it is, how it should live, and how it should succeed in its environment. But that story ages. That story can create real problems unless we continually listen to the individual stories of the subgroups and people who are involved in that society. You know, whether we're talking about a family, football team, workplace, you know,
Yeah.
political party. I mean, what we see is a disaster in so many international political parties today because of this embracement of a sole narrative which excludes other people.
Yeah. So back to the dimensions. I had many classes on Hofstede's dimensions, and it was I had to really understand all the different. I had tests on all the dimensions, and I had to memorize them all. So now you are saying that in the new research on neuroscience, are you saying that Hofstede's dimensions are outdated?
No, people try to label things, and I don't want to say outdated. I would say that they are there as a potential tool. The way we use them will have changed substantially, and at some point we may be someplace else. I don't know, but outdated is just a discard label, and I don't want to do that either. I mean, this was valuable work, and it still can offer us some insights. You've studied this. I'm going to put your test to you. Okay, you're Dutch. I'm American. What dimensions might you see that I am typically American in your assessment? You work with me now for a couple months, and which ones don't fit?
Well, so the Dutch are seen as so in communication they are seen as a direct, open communication kind of culture, and in America they are seen as well quite direct, but not as direct as the Dutch. So if a typical American and a typical Dutch person would work together, they would have to, the Dutch person would have to keep into account that the American might not mean everything literally that he says in language use, because the American might be less direct than the Dutch person. That's something I would say.
I see. Are you seeing that in me?
Yes. Yeah. But
Okay.
more in the way that English language is set up. So in English...
Yeah, we're working in English, so...
Yeah, we're working in English, but in the Dutch language is like the way you say something is more direct. So let me give an example here. Well, I have to think of something. So something like you in English you can say, oh, you wouldn't happen to have blah blah blah, you know.
Okay.
And in Dutch you just say, do you have? Like,
Okay,
this is already in language. There's a more.
There are softeners in my language
Yeah.
that may not exist in yours, but at least not in my use of English. Yeah.
So, yeah. But for me, I'm actually not very direct as a person, so it's difficult for me to understand.
Yeah, but you see that the other members on our team find you more direct.
They do?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, and sometimes they're a little hesitant to question you about stuff because it comes out so directly. So,
Really?
Yeah. We'll talk about that some other time. But so, is there a U.S. dimension that doesn't fit for me that you can think of?
No, I think we're a great fit, like for us too. But so say U.S.
Hofstede's
and Dutch.
terms.
Yeah, in Hofstede's terms. So a way that the Dutch and the Americans wouldn't fit.
Or I just am different from other Americans that you've experienced.
So maybe in hierarchy, as dimension, I think the Dutch are less hierarchical than the Americans, and I think that could clash in a way that I think the Netherlands is more flat in their orientation in the company, and the boss can easily talk with an intern, and the boss can kind of gain insights from the intern.
Okay, well, as far as I'm concerned, am I real high on that, or am I just in the middle, or?
No, I think you're quite we're quite flat in this organization, right? I mean, we're learning from each other.
That's what you're experiencing.
All the time. That's my experience. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I mean, what I'm saying is that we look at each context in which we live, and then you go back home and you deal with the other people in your life, and each time a context is perhaps different,
Yeah.
and there are perhaps clues in what Hofstede has told us about what's going on here,
Yeah.
You go to a meeting in another culture and only one person speaks, you at least have a clue that you might check out how this dimension is working here, if that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
In this organization, in this meeting, in this context, that's
Yeah.
the...
Well, this is the
important
first
thing to look at.
the first American company I've worked at, so my experience so far were quite similar culturally.
Yeah, well, an American company, let's see, there's a guy from the Netherlands, somebody from Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tunisia, Poland, and we're pretty diverse.
Yeah, we're not quite American actually.
Well, American companies can be diverse too in their origins, but
Yeah.
these are directly people from other places.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's hard. I don't want to get into describing it, so let's go someplace else with that.
So back to the dimensions. I want to ask you: should we continue teaching this in universities?
Yes, but I don't think it should be the dominant way that we teach people to look at cultures.
Yeah, because it is now. It's a dominant. Way.
Well, and it has been monetized by thousands of trainers around the world.
Yeah, it's a great
and
tool.
it's hard for people to get rid of something that they've had as their basic tool for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So it's in a sense a real crisis in the intercultural field, in that people need to realize that they need to go other places and create other models. Now, also the fact is many people have based their own individualistic models of training and teaching about culture on Hofstede and other people like Trompenaars who do similar kinds of dimensional thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And both their organizations, if you look at their online websites and so on, they're realizing this impact and beginning to look at how their tools can be flexibly used rather than taught sort of apodictically about this is the way you interpret culture and here's the tool that you use,
So you're saying not as the dominant teaching material.
No.
What
essential to know,
yeah,
but not the way you will primarily look at culture today.
it should be in the history of intercultural communication, but not as the main theory or.
Well, there's lots of history. There's lots of good stuff out there that's still important. I mean, we could go one layer deeper. Edward Hall, who was really one of the pioneers as well with Hofstede, because Hall took a look at the situations that people were in. He actually, when the United States created the Peace Corps, okay, Hall was consulted on that sort of stuff because young people were going abroad and didn't know diddly squat about the cultures that they were going to. And it was very quickly realized that these people need to be trained and given new tools to explore and perceive the culture that they're in, I remember one story was, this young group was sent to a certain Latin American country to organize and dig a water source well for a city, okay, or a town, really, a small town. And they weren't getting anywhere and getting collaboration from people. And then somebody heard that the town wanted a fountain. So they included the fountain in the idea, and that would be dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and there would be a nice statue in front of the fountain. Bang! Everybody pitched in and created the well to serve the fountain and serve also the religious sentiment and of the people.
So what's the key message here?
Key message was they discovered the context.
Yeah, context.
They discovered what would address the interest and encouragement of the people that they were working with.
Yeah. So, George, what should we teach as the dominant intercultural
Well,
communication material?
we should teach dominance does not exist. We use what we see best working to understand who we are and where we're going. And I mean, I don't want to go into the details of what I think is leading edge at this point, but we've already mentioned stories tell us how we have been created in our culture, how we live our culture, how we share our culture, how we inculcate other people into our culture, and every one of our cultures is a material thing found in the neurons of our body. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps a couple millennia of dyadic thinking about the human being is a body and a soul, a mind and a matter, a ghost in the machine. Forget it. Mm-hmm. We are us. I'm not saying that we are, I'm not attacking spirituality or the fact that we're integrated into nature, but we need to take it, and a lot of people who are doing spirituality right now are looking at the deeper, how are we a part of the whole, and that sort of stuff. Each religion, of course, has its mythology about how it came about and how God was involved with the people and so on and so forth. Nothing wrong with that. But what we're realizing is that we need to understand that in new and more empowering ways, and in ways that particularly don't divide us but bring us together.
The stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, and each other.
And each other.
And are told by each other.
Stories.
And then, of course, the challenge of the big stories that dominate groups.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Okay. I think we talked about it.
Well, we did talk about it a bit. I'd be eager to hear what other people think about it, but I just think that the bottom line for me is we've got to get away from absolutes and realize that all kinds of new dimensions of how we live and who we are emerging, and especially in this time of the challenge that has occurred with all the devastating world events and the challenge that is arising through AI, for example, and how we will embrace that, live with it, embody it in our culture. We can talk another time about that because I did some research with AI people and
we should.
students. So, thank you. I think we're good enough. And once again, I just want to say thank you, Gert Hofstede. You have been a big, important contribution to how we got started and where we're going, and we respect you and hold your work as something that we can use yet as well as develop, in different directions. Yeah.
And what is a question you would ask anyone listening about Gert Hofstede? Something they can think about?
What other approaches are you exploring these days?
Okay.
Are you exploring them with other interculturalists, and are you examining the models you're using to make sure that they're not essentialist in how they're being used and creating biases or prejudices too easily?
Okay.
Amen.
Let us know.
Amen.
Thank you.
De rien, monsieur. Thank you very much for listening. It's a great opportunity to share our perspectives with each other. And if you're interested in raising more questions or have ideas about topics that you'd like to see addressed in this podcast series, don't hesitate to make a note and let us know in the responses below. Thanks. Bye-bye.